So to start off with this CAT tools, which was the most popular subject, and it was one of the subjects offered at the undergraduate level at the university. So we had over 40 students enrolled, and they had split us up into two groups to make it more manageable. And about 80% of the subject was dedicated to Trado Studio 2019. We started with the basics. So I think for people who had never dealt with a CAT tool before, things like what is a translation memory, what are fuzzy and perfect matches, what's an XLIF document, etc. And first we practiced translating a single document and then progressed to actually creating project in Trado Studio and then importing and exporting packages. So I guess we looked at things from a freelancer point of view, but also from what a project manager would need to do if they were working in an agency. And then we also learnt numerous shortcuts in Trado Studio, and then went more in depth to practice using filters, batch tasks, and parsing rules. And we also briefly covered programs like SDL Group Share and Multitum, although it was funny that the lecturer almost immediately told us that it was much easier to use a free app that SDL offered called Glossary Converter, for example, instead of using the official multi-term software. We learnt about things like legacy documents and creating new translation memories, etc. And so despite myself working as a translator since 2012 already, I hadn't really used SDL Trados before, and I did think it'd be quite scary to try and learn it myself, so this subject was quite helpful. But unfortunately, I guess a lot of the information I received just confirmed or reinforced my opinion that it was an overly complicated program. It had too many options, most of which I'd never use. And even now, 6 months after the course, after the theory part of the course had finished, I find that I'm forgetting a lot of details. And I had to refer to my notes when I was creating this presentation. But part of the issue for me, of course, is that I work on a Mac laptop, and so I don't actually have Trados installed because I didn't want to get into the whole boot camp or running parallels on my laptop. But if you do like SDL Trados, or you hope to work with it in the future, there was also a couple of perks included in the course. So for example, we could sit the SDL Trados Studio exams for free. It was included in the subject. And then two of the exams, the Getting Started and the Advanced one, actually formed part of our marks for this subject. And then if you pass the exams, you can actually display the logo on your website or on your profile page, which is quite handy. And then on top of that, as a student of the course, we were given free access to SDL Trados Studio for 1 year, but the program could only be used for practice or for study, not for paid work. Again, unfortunately, because I have a Mac, I couldn't make use of that great offer. And then we also had a few classes dedicated to MemSource, but these consisted mostly of a group project where the lecturer had found a real client for us, which sounded like a great idea in theory, but in reality, because we had so many students with different language combinations, it turned out to be very messy to try to group us all together in equal groups. And for the same reason, we didn't have time to actually learn about MemSource from our lecturer. We got thrown into the deep end and had to figure things out as we go, which, I mean, I always considered MemSource quite straightforward, but then when we looked at the project management side of things, I was actually surprised by how complicated it got. So the next subject is audiovisual translation, and this was by far the most relaxing and enjoyable subject in the course, and it was a definite favorite among the students. So it was completely hands-on, and we used a software called Swift, which is no longer being supported by its developers, but that was the software installed at the computer lab. And one of the first things we learnt in the subject was readability, or making sure that there's not too much text on the screen and that it stayed on the screen long enough for the viewer to be able to watch it, to read it. And readability is measured in CPS, which is characters per second. So when we translated, we had to make sure that the CPS was 13 or less for foreign language subtitles and 17 or less for closed captioning or monolingual subtitles. And this, of course, created a lot of angst among students who had to translate into German, for example. And even I struggled translating from English to Russian because Russian words do tend to be longer than the English ones. But then we had one Chinese student who, for her, it was obviously a breeze. She could translate a whole line of text in just 4 characters. And secondly, we had to ensure that a subtitle stayed on the screen for at least 1 second, but no longer than 6 seconds. And thirdly, a single subtitle could not be more than 2 lines long, which meant that, if there was some rapid fire conversation on the screen, you had to really choose what you wanted to show as a subtitle. And it was also important to ensure that the subtitle appeared at the exact moment that a person started speaking, which was something we practiced a lot, catching that exact frame when someone opened their mouth or when the first sound appeared. But also to make sure that the subtitle didn't disappear as soon as they stopped speaking, since reading is slower than speaking generally. And then as the course went on, we also learned to pay attention to shot changes, which is when there's a cut in the filming. So when a scene changes or the film angle changes, to make sure that a subtitle either stopped a few frames before or a few frames after the shot change, so that the viewer didn't have the sort of double whammy of having the subtitle disappear and then having the shot change. And of course, our subtitles couldn't be too close together, so we also had to count the number of frames between them. And so all in all, it made subtitling a sort of interesting puzzle you had to figure out, all the while creating accurate but succinct translations. Something that I found quite memorable was a guest lecturer we had who talked about surtitles, which are subtitles displayed in theatres and opera, usually so that the local audience can listen to a foreign language production. And I had never seen surtitles before in Australia, so it was a really interesting concept that I enjoyed learning about. So multilingual workflow management was probably the most time-consuming and stressful subject, in my opinion. It is taught online, as our lecturer is based in France, and she's a very experienced project manager who runs her own translation company. So the subject provided a detailed breakdown of the steps involved in managing a translation or a language project, and what is required to run a successful agency, both from a financial but also from a practical point of view. So we learnt about which linguistic steps were required to deliver a high quality translation. So not just translation and revision, but linguistic quality assurance, language sign-off, and things like that. We also discussed DTP, when it was needed, what was involved, and how it could be integrated into the process to make sure that there weren't extra errors added on at the end. And surprisingly, actually, the subject involved a lot of maths. So we spent a lot of time talking about rates and metrics, trying to work out how many words or pages could be done per hour or per day, and thus what were the realistic prices for those steps, both from the point of view of a freelancer, but also from the point of view of a project manager who might be working in an agency that needs to have a gross margin for every project. So this is what I mean by metrics, assuming that a certain number of words could be translated per day or per hour, and then in order to calculate how many days a project would take, and having to keep in mind things like public holidays, translator sicknesses, weekends, things like that. Or in the second case, this is an example of a metric for DTP. So estimating how many pages of a document could undergo DTP per hour, depending on the program that was used, because some of them were more complicated than others. Oops, sorry. So this naturally led to a discussion about estimating the duration of projects, keeping in mind all those factors I talked about before, like weekends and public holidays and linguist availability. And we practiced overlapping, which is when a subsequent step in the project is started before the previous one is finished. But for example, we had to keep in mind that the reviser works 3 times as fast as a translator. So you had to be careful to make sure that the reviser didn't overtake the translator and run out of things to do during a lengthy project. And we also discussed using multiple translators or revisers for large projects and how to balance speed with consistency. For example, trying to have a minimum number of revisers and having perhaps only one LQA specialist whose job would then be to integrate all the different parts that had been translated into a seamless whole. And we also practiced creating quotes, purchase orders, invoices, so that we knew exactly what was needed to be included for practical and legal reasons. And we even had a discussion about VAT. So for example, that there's differences in how you quote VAT depending on whether both the client and the linguist or the agency is in the same country, or whether they're in different countries but still part of the EU, or whether one of you is actually outside of the EU, which I guess was interesting for me since I don't charge tax, since my clients are always overseas and I'm based in Australia. And finally, we learned about project tracking and how to track the different steps to make sure that nothing's missed, that linguists submit work on time. And our lecturer even showed us how she arranges files and folders in her computer. And we were asked to present theoretically how we would arrange our files if we were managing a project. So software and website localization, this slide actually covers two different subjects, but I decided to include them all on one slide because they were mainly taught by the same lecturer. And the two subjects integrated quite well with multilingual workflow management. For example, we learnt about DTP and which software could be used to localize products with visual content. We also learned the basics of Adobe Photoshop, and we used it to localize images, a process the lecturer called faking, which was a fun activity, kind of like, I don't know, coloring in kindergarten, but it was also very slow and time consuming. So if you can imagine, we'd receive images which had a lot of colors and text and different pictures and things. And then we had to very, very carefully erase the source text and then insert our translations while matching the exact font, size, text, making sure it didn't take too much space, etc. And as part of software localization, we also learned some basic coding. We also learned how to recognize translatable content that could be translated and which parts of the HTML, for example, should be left well alone so that you don't actually break the code. And we were given, for example, some coding documents that had some text that was broken. So then we had to fix it ourselves to figure out which part of the program, of the coding, had actually been deleted or altered. And we fixed these errors mostly in Notepad++, which sadly, once again, I can't run on my Mac laptop. And while most of these subjects were also very practical and hands-on, so we did a lot of practicing things ourselves in class, we also had some theory sessions about SEO and localization for different markets. So we talked about how global companies adjust their marketing messages for different cultures and how they go about achieving what they want. So just to briefly cover the second semester, which was all dedicated to the internship, and that had to be at least 450 hours, and it had to take place between February and June this year. It could be done either in Belgium or overseas. It could be paid or unpaid. And the internship could involve any combination of the topics that we'd covered. So anything from project management to LQA to translation, etc. For privacy reasons, I don't really want to go into my personal internship, but I wanted to talk about the general experience of trying to find an internship, which was left up to me. And I found it very difficult for me, and I know other non-EU students had a similar problem. So the university gave us a list of suggested companies, but these were mostly in Belgium, and for obvious reasons, these agencies preferred students who could speak or translate French, Dutch, or German, and I don't speak any of those languages. And so even though my A language is English, and I was assuming that was going to make it easier for me to find a position, for example, doing project management or doing English language reviews, most agencies were not interested in taking me on as an intern until finally an agency in St. Petersburg did agree to take me. So as an overall impression, as you've probably gathered, I had sort of mixed feelings about my experience of studying in Belgium. If I talk about the course itself, it was very practical, it was very industry focused, and I learned a lot in that one semester. It was quite fast paced and we had lots of information thrown at us every week. So for someone like me who had been out of university for a number of years, it sometimes felt overwhelming, but I'm glad that I learned everything that I did in it. It was nice. It was a nice small group. I think there was less than 15 students in total for the course, and plus we didn't all do the same subjects. So some classes were even smaller, and it was really fun at times. For example, subtitling scenes out of Faulty Towers or Shrek, or having to do localization for like a colorful poster about Pokemon, etc. And I was also very glad about the perks that we received, such as the SDL and MEMSOR certification. But what I found quite disappointing was just the huge amount of bureaucracy around enrolling in the course and around getting the student visa to come to Belgium. And a lot of the paperwork actually felt like it was not really necessary, and I couldn't really understand the purpose of having quite so much that had to be done. And I also believe that the process of coming to study in Belgium was more stressful for a non-EU student. And to my complete surprise, there were no additional supports in place at the university for students like me. So, for example, the Faculty of Arts had an Erasmus program coordinator, but foreign students who were not on the Erasmus program, and there were some of us, were sort of left to our own devices completely. And similarly, trying to find an internship was, I found, quite a demotivating process, especially when you try for several months and you just receive no's all the time. I initially had thought the university would find an internship for us, but then that wasn't the case. And so our experiences, different students had very different experiences. My Belgian friend, I think, got her first choice, basically. She got an internship really quickly at a place in Brussels. But then for others like me, especially if our languages weren't FIGS, it was a much more difficult process. So I think those factors would be good to keep in mind if you're a student who is interested in this course, or perhaps something that the university might work on in the future. That's it from me. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Hello. Yes, there is a rather blunt question, you know. Can you measure how did it help you in your work? So it's before the course and after the course, in terms of productivity, for example, or in terms of obtaining new clients via these certifications, all that. Did it help you, or?
I think it's hard to measure in terms of getting new clients, since, you know, clients don't tell you that, oh, I saw that you graduated this course, so that's why I decided to contact you. But in terms of knowledge, I felt like I learned a lot. I became more confident about using CAT tools, since previously I was just using them as just blindly. So MemSource, MemoQ, SmartCat, I learnt them as I go. While in this case, I realized that there were more functions that I had been ignoring previously. And then in terms of software and website localization, this was a field I'd never worked in before, which I found quite terrifying. So it's nice to sort of have at least a base to be able to understand a bit more about what's involved and what it takes.
Thank you. Any other questions?
No, we don't have any questions from online. So thank you very much, Sophia. This is Serena speaking.
Yeah, I can't see anybody.
Yeah, so thank you for coming here. Thank you for speaking, and I really hope that next year you will be able to come here personally.
Yeah.
And have another speech or just have a great time sitting here among your colleagues.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye for now.
Bye.
See you. Bye.
Cover break. Cover break.
Hello, everyone. This is Terrace Hall speaking. And today at UTICamp, we have Alessandra Martelli. Alessandra is a creative translator from Italy. And actually, she is the one who created this stream this year, because Alessandra was a member of program committee this year. And her speech is about conversation to conversion, getting website copyright. And today you will get known about the websites and how it should be created for translators. Alessandra?
So, hi everyone. I'm sorry, it's a little weird that, okay, now I see myself. Hi everyone. Thank you very much for having me, Irina, and everyone. I'm really sorry I'm not there live, but I do hope you're having a great time, and I'm really grateful I can be with you at least here in spirit presentation. So, as Irina was saying, today I'm going to talk with you about business websites and the words we use to get to what marketers call a conversion. So actually having someone do something after they visit your website, which means getting in contact with you and hopefully buying from you. And we're first starting to think this conversation and how I would go about telling you about websites. I didn't want to go generic, so I thought of someone that could help us understand and go through this topic. And this someone is Mark. Now, Mark is a freelance translator with all the perks and the glitter that you can imagine. As you can see, he has a stunning background, all the fancy letters in the name because he studied so hard and that lots of qualifications and credentials. He has rock solid experience working mostly with LSPs for over 10 years. He cares about his continuing education, so he has specialized courses and any kind of uh, professional update he can get. He's very fluent with CAT tools. I think there's a few publications under his belt. You name it. Anything you can think that fits in a solid professional profile for a translator, Mark has it. Mark, he's really new to business, and this business has been very good for a while. For over 10 years, he mostly worked with agencies, as I said before. But nowadays, things are a little different because, there are some things that are changing within the industry, outside of the industry, and reflecting in the industry. And his business is kind of getting slow and slower. So he knows that if he wants to stay afloat, he has to do something, namely find new clients. So he finds himself tasked with a challenge. How do you go about finding new clients? Possibly as soon as possible so that this slow time result in a slump or a setback. So the first thing that Mark would do, and the first thing that any translator or professional in general within this scenario would be to gauge his options. And as you know, a professional translator has a few options when going on the hunt to find new clients or expanding his business or making adjustments to his business to make sure it stays well and thriving. So he thinks about maybe branching out with adding a few different services, or we could think about specializing further in something, or opening a new stream of business that might be complementary to language service, but not that necessarily related to language services themselves. Or it could continue pursuing agency outreach as he has, but the problem is that a response from agencies hasn't been very successful for him, and the competition is up and all the usual problems. So at a certain point, Mark thinks that he really likes what he does, He doesn't want to branch out as a web designer or anything else. He likes translation. He wants to work in the translation business, and he would love to continue working with agencies because it's been well and lovely ever since, but he needs to fill in some gaps. So he thinks, okay, you know what? I know the people I've been working for the last 10 years through the middleman. So I'm going to hunt for direct translation clients. This is something that most translators do. So you probably might or could relate to Mark when he creates his perfect action plan. Okay, I'm going to create or revamp my professional website and talk to the direct client instead of the agency. I'm going to get tons of traffic, tons of leads. I'm going to get rich and live happily ever after. Now, the action plan as is might sound perfect, and in a way, it is. He's used to working with companies in certain industries or fields, so he knows a little more about the context and not just the problems that are usually embedded within the translation project. But this is also where Mark's journey, or any translator's journey wanting to move from one scenario to the other, might fall into. There is a trap in there, because even though Mark knows the company is being working with through the agencies, is really not thinking about the fact that right now trying to target new agents, new direct clients instead of agencies, means having a change in your target audience. And even though he knows a bit about them, he soon finds out that they are very different targets. So, for starters, their different lies in the understanding and the awareness of what translation entails. Of course, an agency client, a project manager, would know about the translation process. What does it need to get right? What are the steps? What's this and that, and the CAT tools and the need for a glossary and reference files, etc. I'm sorry. Mr. Direct Client, on the other hand, in the vast majority of occasions, doesn't know about this. And he honestly doesn't care. Because as you will see, they also have other differences. They don't really speak the same language when it comes to what's a translation to them and for them. They also have different needs. Mr. Project Manager actually goes on professional websites to find people to recruit for an agency. This doesn't mean that he has a project to take on and get done right here and right now. Of course, it means that he's looking for a way to expand their database and their list of potential collaborators for whatever project comes at hand. Mr. Direct Client, on the other hand, when he goes on a hunt for a translator, most of the times isn't thinking about the long-term relationship and the business partner. He needs to get a translation done right here, right now, hopefully by yesterday. So you see different level of awareness and different needs. And of course, with that also comes a different mindset. As we said before, Mr. Project Manager is in for the long run. Mr. Project Manager needs someone he can rely on no matter what comes in, hopefully someone that can take on as many projects as possible in a certain area or language combination. Whereas Mr. Direct Client is only looking to buy a translation, which is exactly what they have in mind. 99% of the times they don't browse professional websites to find potential long-term partners. They go because they need to make a purchase right here and right now. So if you think about it, it's obvious that in order to appeal to Mr. Project Manager or to Mr. Client, you have to consider their different points of view, which means that Mark, if he wants to succeed in getting this target shift of his right, so be successful in attracting clients and leads and conversions from his website, needs to make a mindset shift first. So he has to stop thinking about promoting himself and his services to be hired or to start a cooperation, a long-term one. He has to walk into the mindset shift of promoting his services to sell something. And as simple and as obvious this might be, this is where most professionals fails when they go online and make the shift from a agency scenario to a direct client scenario. And it's not just about translators, you know. I've been with web designers, I've been working with marketing strategists, I've been working with different kinds of creatives. And when they started actually shifting from, okay, I'm going for the B2B cooperation, because marketing agencies, advertising agencies, translation agencies, all sorts of business services agencies often rely on external help. We all know that. Now that these people want to target someone else, they kind of don't know where they might need to tweak things a bit. And this mindset shift is essential if you want to step upright. And it has, of course, to be reflected in your marketing materials and the thing that you use online to get found, which is your website. Now, in a typical website for agency client scenario, and again, I'm talking about, of course, translators' websites, but this can also be seen in web designers or UX designers, web developers, etc. If a little Google and a little browsing, you will see exactly what I'm telling you here. You can see in these kinds of websites with this kind of target audience that the content is structured and presented in a specific way. It often resembles an online curriculum. So you may have about me, background, services, qualifications, technical equipment or technical skills as their website menu items. And also websites targeted at the middleman persona often come with industry jargon and all the fancy words we use when we talk about our work and nobody else understands outside of our industry. That's normal. That's absolutely normal. And it makes perfect sense if you are targeting a target persona within your industry, an industry insider. Similarly, in those websites, you don't see much personality because it all derives from that writing and promoting for getting hired mentality. So you have a very neutral, formal, what we would call business tone of voice, which is nothing but the death of creativity. And you have a lot of focus on selling the features of the professional. So it's all about the experience, the CPD, the software you can use, the CAT tools you own, the industry qualifications you have acquired, etc., etc. It's kind of an hard sell within the framework of a recruiting process. And these websites are usually not really enticing for anyone but their intended targeted audience. And it should be like that. You know, when you're communicating, writing on your website, on your newsletters, on your blog to one person, you cannot appeal anybody else, because each person or market segment or marketing persona, you call it. I like thinking about people because it keeps it real and it keeps it very focused on what we are about to tell now. So when you talk to one person, you know that you are leaving aside other people that do not have that background, that need, and that interest that you are trying to tackle within a certain page or a newsletter or a post. That's okay. But for Mr. Client, it doesn't really make sense. When he browses, sorry for a translator, and he finds a website that is designed with agency clients in mind, he cannot really make sense of the pieces. He finds himself in an online framework he's not really familiar with. He finds himself looking at information that we of course take for granted in an industry insider scenario, but that really don't speak to his mind because he has the slightest clue about the tools, etc., just as you have probably little clue about the computer software he uses in his work, unless you're nerd enough to go and research all the software warehouse things each and every of your client uses. And the result is that if the client doesn't understand what's in front of him, what you're trying to sell, what you're trying to tell, or doesn't feel at ease with it, that he does not buy. There is no deal happening because he doesn't feel that you're talking to him so that he would be able to understand him. The problem lies, as I said, in the mindset shift Mark and any other marks on the planet need to make. And it's all about understanding where your audience is starting from. As I said before, direct client starts with a purchase mindset. To him, as much as we know that translation is a service, not a commodity, not a product, a translation is a product that he needs on his desk to complete something. So he wants to make a purchase. He doesn't want to go and ramble about what's behind making that product. He doesn't care about the storytelling. He doesn't care about the history, or maybe he does. But you have to present them things in a way that makes sense to them. Otherwise, there could be no deal possible. And the first thing is that when Mr. Client starts with a purchase in mind, the first idea that springs is that of a classical in-person purchase. So you walk into a shop, you browse around the shop windows, all neatly organized in a way that appeals to the client's eye. And we all know that all shops, large retailer shops and brands, have strict guidelines on how you should, arrange the shop windows, because it makes a difference. So when that client goes in real life to make a purchase, he finds himself in a very welcoming, recognizable, and friendly environment, something that makes him feel at ease, something he can understand quickly with a glance of the eye. And of course, in a shop, he would meet someone that would smile to him and ask them, how are you doing? What's your day like? So, is there anything that is getting your attention, etc.? He's in the direct client's mind, purchases start with talking to someone. So the sales process starts with a conversation. So in order to make Mr. Client feel at ease in your online shop, that is your website, it's on the hunt for this kind of client, of course. It's much wiser to start thinking from his point of view and try to recreate the feel and the mood of an in-person encounter and of a shopping and sales experience he can understand. And there are two ways you can go about with this. Of course, you can go about creating a website structure that is in line with what he expects and what he is used to. And then you would have, all the tiny bits and pieces, the technical equipment and computer skills wouldn't be in a separate tab on the menu, but would probably be embedded in and weaved in a discussion about your skills in general, as an example. And of course, you go about making him feel at ease and comfortable with the words you use to connect with this specific client. And when I'm talking about direct clients, I'm not really going industry specific because there really isn't anything specific about this. It's all about the general point of view. These kind of considerations on how to create your website works whether you want to target design studios, law firms, dental practices, gyms and wellness center. The problem is that it's not a problem. The core of it all is that when you talk to someone to make a sale directly rather than through a middleman. When you are in this kind of scenario, you have to think conversation. And of course, apart from the information architecture you use on your website, so how you categorize and divide and order and present your services and skills and what you have to offer, it also goes down, of course, to the language you would use, because you would have to appeal to someone that thinks differently than an agency entity which is hiring freelancers as external collaborators, which is where conversational copywriting comes into play. And when I'm talking about conversational copywriting, I'm talking about crafting sales copy that sounds and has the typical flow and pace and coziness of the conversation. Now, it might be not as immediate to get the difference about conversational copywriting and standard copywriting, but you will certainly understand that if you think of the typical 80s used car salesman and what really goes on websites that we all visit and use every day, such as for the people who are interested in marketing, it can be websites of advertising agencies and marketing agencies, entities like Copyblogger, Sumo for website analysis, etc. You can see on SEMrush website, whatever happens there is mostly conversational copywriting. So there is sales copy. Those websites do not write for fashion or because of their liking. They do sell, and they sell hard and wide on their website. But the kind of message they convey is put in a way that feels like not a pushy sales force, but a cozy conversation, a dialogue, something that comes up naturally. The object of the sale comes out naturally out of the conversation. And this kind of copywriting, and we see it really all over the place, it all brings benefits on both sides of the pond. On the client side, reading a piece of conversational copy rather than the hard sell sounds more natural. And as it is naturally, pardon my stumble on words, is more engaging because it doesn't feel like you are talking to the sales to the car salesman. It feels like you're talking to someone you might actually like and you might actually trust, and it's not trying to pull you out of your money every second. Conversational copy is also fostering and promoting trust at a deeper level. When we see all the glitzy headlines, all the exclamation marks at the end of the sentence, the all caps message, we feel invaded and we feel distrustful because nowadays every client and even us as client have had our fair share of people that make lots of promises on their websites, make lots of promises online, and have the miracle cure for anything when in fact they don't. So conversational copy, getting into the flow of using a language that makes us feel more, makes us sound more human and actually as people. It's more trustworthy than the old formal business tone because it now feels like a barrier. The internet world is changing, and what really felt like posh and elegant and proper, so using the formal address for your user from your website readers or something like that, felt proper back 20 years ago, but nowadays it's not like that. So when you find someone that still acts like that, it kind of makes you feel awkward and out of place. And also conversational copy being more natural, more closer to what you would do in a normal sales situation, in an in-person sales situation, which is what every one of us is grown with, promotes a stronger connection with your potential client because you come across as a person and not just a website page. On your side, using conversational copywriting is actually good because it's more personal. When you engage in a conversation, you normally tend to do what you do. You simply do you, as the American says. So you start using your normal references to whatever you like or what you've seen. You start using your favorite words, and we all have them. I have a thing for old-fashioned words, and when I write, and even when I write for my website or a newsletter, I tend to use them because that's what I do. And if I'm having a conversation, it's only natural that these things actually come out. So using a conversational style rather than the formal, strict, and CV style tone actually gives you more personality. It differentiates you, and people do business with people they like and they can connect and relate to. So this kind of copy is actually the key to finding people that think like you and like what you do, so things you can connect with in a different level. Using conversational copy also takes much of the awkwardness of having to sell yourself and your services, because it makes you feel more at ease as you write. And of course, being conversational, using the words and expressions you would use normally, uh, is good for the clarity and simplicity of your writing. You can actually make your message heard louder and clearer without using all the convoluted formalities we are used to when discussing the agency client scenario in general. And if you're anything like Mark, at this point, you might fall into the trap of the common thought whether conversational would make sound unprofessional. Now, these things they only rhyme, but it's not really the same. This kind of bias that being approachable and friendly using common language as being unprofessional dates really back. If you think about it, you will find it in Dickens' novels when the people who had to get to be hired by the master had to dress well, behave well, and use all the words that they didn't use since they learned them in their only year of school. You have to, when you think of writing and promoting yourself or getting hired, you kind of fall into of having to dress and behave properly so people see that you're a good deal. But if it were true, it wouldn't really add up to something. Now, if you think about it, there is really nothing that prevents people from being approachable and professional. Now, I know that much of the audience might come from anywhere in the world, so I don't know if you might know some of these people, but uh, Marie Forleo, which is a very, very successful entrepreneur and copywriter, American copywriter and copywriting trainer and benefactor, etc., has a very, very approachable tone on her website. But no one would question her professionality. And if you don't know her, maybe you might know of Sir David Attenborough. And I beg that I'm sure to bet that no one would deem him unprofessional for using plain language and approachable expressions in his documentaries. On the other hand, that wins him awards, prizes, and titles because he's good at raising awareness of what he does. So with Mr. Attenborough or Marie Forleo, or the two together, which might go very well in mind as an example of how conversational and professional can really go hand in hand if done right, if you don't overdo it, if you don't fall into the little traps that come to it. Let's see in the last leg of this presentation, how do you go about writing conversational copy with Mark Self, of course. And the first tip I want to give you is don't write like you talk. This is the worst piece of advice I've seen over and over on copywriting or so called pro copywriters. Conversational copywriting isn't about writing like you talk. When you think about it, and even right now, you will notice that when we talk, we tend to stumble and rumble. Our thoughts are fast, and sometimes we don't finish the sentences, or we jump from one concept into another, kind of rushing because in our heads everything is clear, or maybe you had to stumble over a word or two and go back and clarify that bit. This would be normal in a conversation between two people sitting, around the table with good coffee or ice cream in their hands and time. But this doesn't really work in websites. You don't have a second chance. You don't have a chance to clarify things for a reader when he doesn't understand. So, conversational copywriting isn't about writing like you talk. As all pieces of sales copy, it has to be well thought and well executed. So, the first rule of conversational copywriting is actually deciding on a copywriting formula or framework you can use. And you can really go very classic with the problem agitate solution for a sales page. And you can really go about the AIDA formula. So, copy that evolves from the first raising attention stage to raising interest to eliciting desire to promoting action. These kind of frameworks and formulas work mostly for any industries, but you have to know them and execute them well. So the point is choose a copywriting framework. For a sales page, use a solid sales page layout. Don't just ramble on why your product or translation services are the best. But then, after you have drafted this, go back to what you have written and try to make it more cozy so you don't look like the salesman we talked about. And the second rule of conversational copywriting is actually writing to one person. This is something that all copywriters and all copywriting trainers say, and this is true for a reason. This is one of the first things I learned when I first started copywriting, things I have heard over and over again at any specialization course. You have to write to an audience of one. And there is a very simple reason for that, if you think about it. If you, as a reader, go on a web page and find the sentence that goes like, "Oh, so you are, if you are a web designer slash fashion designer slash creative studio slash business practice, then I'm the right person for you." Well, that moment, that single moment is where you lose all of your chances of selling your translation service to a Mr. Client, because that kind of arrangement actually creates a barrier. If you actually started things on the right foot, but then you fall into that trap, trying to appeal to everyone, trying to be everything to everyone at every time, you will lose everyone because nobody likes to talk to a flyer. Conversations are about one to one interaction. So, my piece of advice, if you work for multiple industries, if you have different target personas and you want to appeal them, write more pages on your website and tailor one page to one person and one message. Just don't stop at the marketing persona profile you sketched. Just picture a real person in your mind. Figure out what they might say, what they might be interested in, and how would you start a conversation with them? What pressures that person the most? And you will find out that even though people, well, of course, we round them up in personas because there are similarities. People are never the same. So when you write, and you write with conversion and conversation in mind, stick to one person. Of course, you don't have to use the name, but figure and picture that person in your mind before you start writing, and be very specific. And don't be afraid of missing out just because you are addressing one person or persona, depending on how sophisticated that is. Fear that if you don't rule out in advance the people that you don't want to target with that page, you will start attracting probably lots of traffic, but not many leads and sales. Conversational copywriting tip or rule number 3: write like a human. When we speak, we normally use contractions. We start sentences with ands, buts. However, we repeat words sometimes. We tend to change the pace, change the tone, and use all the words, the little words, the interjections, the moment of, oh snap, I have forgot something, that you normally use. These things, using contraction words, using transition words, not just being like the print book, but feeling like a tiny bit. Not, of course, all the time. You cannot start any sentence with and but sometimes you can do that. And that really helps in keeping the feel and the sound and the flow of a conversation, of a human talking to another human. And same goes for contractions, of course. Number 4, steal your client's words. Conversational copywriting has a strong empathetic connection element of empathetic connection, as I mentioned before. And it works 100 times more when you actually use the words the client would use. Now, if you look at all the scheduling apps and tools that are out there, you will see that most of the most famous, such as Trello, Asana, etc., make a great use of this kind of tip and steal their clients' words all the time. Use this tool to save time and get things done. As you can hear, this is not our scheduling app is the most cost and time effective solution for your scheduling needs, which is something that very highly resembles what you would normally find in an agency client targeted website scenario. Use the words that people use, that the same words that you use when you're not talking about your work. Speak of benefits, just as your clients would. And there's a very, very simple trick to do that. When you get a good referral, when you get a client testimonial, when you get a nice message of thank you for your work, people would tell something to you. Start from there. Source your words from the words your client uses within their inquiries, in their conversations, in the conversation you have with them, in the conversations that happen between them on social media or when they look for advice on client fora. These kind of sources are a treasure trove of conversational language that brings value because it reflects what the client wants, needs, feels, and how they would express themselves. And we all know that if we can relate to how a person expresses themselves, we like them more because we feel closer. So this one is definitely a keeper. Number 5, the rhythm and pace of your writing. I know, I know that for hundreds of posts around the web, you will find the perfect sentence length for your blog post. the perfect sentence length for your social posts, for your website copy, for your newsletters. Forget that, please. Do that for yourself. Because, yes, people tend to have a preference for shorter sentences, but when people talk, they don't always use short sentences. And I am living proof of that. I am known for going on for paragraphs and paragraphs when in conversation. People use short sentences that go on a longer piece of concept, then stop and think, ask a question, make a full stop, or just use one word as a punchline. So, if you're striking for a conversational and approachable tone, which is again the tone that gets you the attention and the possibility to keep the conversation going with your client, stop counting the number of words you use in sentences and just focus on writing something that matters, using just the words you need for that. And if you find yourself maybe a little bit too compromised by the trend of the perfect sentence length, go back to your writing and try separating, adding a little variation. So uh, cut a sentence in two, blend some together, use white space. Use white space. So it gives the reader time to think about what you just said before diving into the next chapter or the next selling point. This kind of rhythm and pace we recognize both in writing and both when reading in our minds. So it really makes sense for us to use a conversational rhythm and pace to your writing. Number six, I touched on this before, but in conversational copywriting, don't be afraid to weave in your favorite words and expressions, things you say in real life, things that your customer might get across in on Instagram when he checks you out there. And not, of course, all the things, but the expressions we use, or something that we are really fond of, a motto, or our way of saying never mind. One big part of conversational copywriting outside of websites, but also on websites to a lesser extent, mostly on direct mailing, newsletters, and that kind of direct thing, is how you open and close your emails. Every one of us has their favorite way of saying hi, how do you do, see you, goodbye. And this isn't just for the way we open and close sentences, it's also about the messages we hit more. So, as an example, in my writing, I talk a lot about conscious writing and mindful writing in a way. So, more quality over quantity, and on considering and pondering the words you use a lot. I am in a lot for effective and conscious writing. So, this is a message I hit. And if you have those kinds of messages, so if you roll in for productivity, if you roll in for any other kinds of things, it makes sense to weave in these concepts in your sales copy, because that would normally pop out in a conversation with you. You will find yourself talking about optimizing things, maybe. Or maybe you will find yourself talking about the grace or the flow of something. Use these words. Use your reference word. Use and source what you say from the language that comes in your alive in your own universe, which is your own. So if you are struggling with that, if it doesn't come out naturally for starters, go back to something you wrote maybe a few months ago. Don't look at your website, look at your social networks, look at your private conversations, and you will see your favorite words popping out. And when it comes to sales copy, sprinkle them wisely to add a personality and boost the conversation factor. And last but not least, use questions in your copy. Conversations are made of dialogues, of people interacting. So even though people cannot really interact with your sales copy, using a question and some white space every now and then, it's what keeps their mind on the subject, keeps them interested, keeps them on the page, getting a nod of agreement at certain point of a sales page could be a very good thing for your conversion. Or just introducing your selling points with questions. Do you ever feel like? This is very common technique copywriting, and it works. It's very common because it works, and it works because people feel immediately more engaged and involved when they're talking and discussing and talking to someone that makes questions and waits for their answers. So speaking of questions, I am done with my presentation. So if you have any questions, it's time for you to speak up. And thank you for listening in the time.
Alexandra, thank you
Yeah.
so much for your refreshing and inspiring speech, and especially for your
Thank
so
you.
precise, helpful, and straight to the point suggestions. Unfortunately, we don't have even a minute for questions, and it would be a
Oh, sorry,
huge
I
eh,
rambled.
it would be a huge pity to say goodbye to you, but luckily we don't have to, and we will meet again on Saturday at 7:30 p.m. In Zoom room dedicated to future of marketing. So please, if you have any questions or ideas to share and discuss, please join us there.
Okay,
See you
thank
there.
you. I will see you
Thank you.
soon. Thank you very much.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
your day then.
Thanks,
Bye.
you too. Bye.
Bye bye.
3 minutes.
Our next speaker is Janet Jackson. Janet Brickner. I'm so sorry, it's something unconscious. So, our next speaker is Janet Brickner, technical and marketing translator from German to English, translator, editor, and copywriter. Having lived in 6 countries and traveled in far more than that, she's now accumulated years of experience with mobile translation and language services from around the globe. And now she's going to share with us her deep insight on practical aspects of traveling translators' priorities. So please welcome Janet Brickner with the Traveling Translators Toolkit.
Hi, everybody. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it to Ukraine. Being an American, we're not really able to go many places right now with our passports.
Jeanette,
But I am able.
please.
Oh, yep. Sorry.
Do you hear me, Jeanette?
I do.
We can't hear you. We need
Okay.
to do okay, and now we can hear you. That's okay now.
Okay.
Okay, so proceeding. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. I am here from the Ukraine, from the UK. Sorry. I wish I was in the Ukraine with all you guys, but unfortunately, American passports make it a little difficult to get around these days. But at least we were able to do this remotely. So I guess welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to be presenting to you about mainly my experience, but also just practical tips and tricks in general for traveling while working. We'll just get started with the slides here. I always like to start these out with who am I and why am I here? Mainly because it changes, who I am doesn't change, but the topic that I'm presenting on, I usually, try to pick these, that are close to my heart. So that part changes pretty much every time. So in general, I'm a German to English translator, specialized in automotive, construction, real estate, and tourism, which comes in handy with this. I've been translating freelance since 2008, off and on in the beginning, and then in-house for a couple of years towards the beginning as well, and also as part of a research assistantship during my graduate program. And I have been translating while traveling quite a bit since 2013, so most of this is going to focus on the period since then. And I call myself a quasi-digital nomad. I'm not a full digital nomad. I don't, travel 100% of the time. And it's, good to sort of, have a few places where you can go and spend a few more months before you get back on the road, because it does get, wearing down on you at times. But with COVID and stuff, we're definitely looking forward to getting back out there once we can. So... next question, and you may ask yourself, why? How did I get here? Silly Talking Heads reference, sorry. So I guess it's been a little bit of a journey, so I'm going to break it down over time here for you. I would say it kind of all began in 2012 when I was working in-house in the United States. And I had a side project that I really wanted to work on at home. And I didn't really have any personal resources, any CAT tools or anything like that. Everything that I worked on up until that point had always been in the office. So basically, I was looking for a CAT tool to sort of get started with. And I didn't really want to invest, too much in it since I was still mainly working in-house. And I came across WordFast Anywhere, which I'm sure a lot of you are probably familiar with. I don't really use it now, but it was really interesting to see their marketing materials back then, because they were basically saying on the website something along the lines of, imagine being able to translate, on your phone or a tablet from anywhere. And certainly back in 2012, I still had quite a dumb phone. So I was definitely not thinking that that was going to be possible the way that it, I suppose, in theory is now. But so I guess there are people out there that are, capable of doing that are doing that occasionally, at least. I hope they're not doing it too much because the screens are pretty darn small. But that sort of changed the way that I was like thinking altogether. Just seeing that this marketing campaign was going along those lines and sort of envisioning that future for the profession in general. And in I would say a relatively short time. I mean, look where we are now, where compared to where we were in 2012 technology wise. It really is pretty much possible to work from nearly anywhere in the world, and that's where we're going to go further along in the presentation. So in 2013, I had moved to Bucharest. I'd gotten a job in-house with a Romanian company. And one of the really striking things about, just transitioning into this new working environment was, from day one, they were, encouraging us to, work, on the beach if we wanted to. The PMs would just, leave on Friday and, come back on Tuesday a lot. And, it didn't disrupt the flow of work really at all, because it was just part of the culture in that office. Like every employee basically had their own powerful laptop that had a docking station for, your spot in the office. And then, a lot of us would, take them home almost every night. I personally like to keep my work to the office at that point still. But most of my colleagues that had extensive freelance experience were, taking theirs home every night and, getting back to it after, a break or whatever. So that was really eye-opening for me, just like the amount of freedom, and that a company was promoting it. That was, just something I wasn't expecting. Certainly with, my American background too, there's a very a cultural aversion to that, I think, which may be changing now with COVID. But it's definitely was, an eye opener to see that. So by the time 2014 came around, I had basically gone independent, full-time freelance for the first time ever. And I don't know if you guys have ever been to Bucharest in August, but it's very hot, and my apartment did not have air conditioning. So this was actually sort of where I really took my first real steps to becoming a more mobile translator. Basically, I would, find a cafe or, go to an establishment owned by a friend of mine, and, with air conditioning, and just work from there. So that really, I became mobile within the city, sort of as a comfort zone to begin with. And that was a sort of nice way to ease into it. So then by the time 2015 came around, I went to the BP translation conference, my first translation conference ever, actually, in Zagreb. And I had a flight booked back to Bucharest from Belgrade. But I was just sitting there at the end of the conference thinking, well, I don't necessarily really want to go back. And, got out the map, kind of looked at it. I noticed that this town that I had always wanted to go to in Hungary, Strombathely, happened to be, about a 3-hour train ride away. Actually, probably less, but, you got to stand around changing trains and stuff. And I was like, well, what's stopping me, And when I really thought about it, there really wasn't anything stopping me from just going. So I went to Strombathely for about 4 or 5 days. The picture down in the bottom left-hand corner there is my first real mobile office, as I like to call them, just the cafe that I set up shop in there. And it was a really, really good experience. And I basically, sort of spent about 3 weeks making my way back overland to Bucharest, completely unplanned. And it was really something that sort of, changed everything. I think that summer I only spent about, 2 or 3 days in Bucharest, too. So, and so those are just, some background on how this all came about. So this is a quote that I really liked that I found on a wall in a hostel in Krakow that same summer. So this 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things that you didn't do than by the ones that you did do. So throw off the bow lines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. And so that kind of really, spoke to me. I found that inspiring, and I decided, what's stopping me from doing that, So a little bit further along in the trip, this is where things really, really start getting, full-time travel. Was basically last year in April. I decided I was going to spend, I originally planned to do 6 months just wandering around the Balkans. I ended up cutting it short, so it was 4 months, and then I came to the UK. But it was still just a completely different experience, just like straight up not having an apartment to go back to, really put everything in storage and that kind of stuff, like just literally living out of what's in your suitcase and working while doing it. And then this January, right before this whole COVID thing came along, I had been planning to do 4 months in Africa. I was going to a translation conference in Tanzania that I spoke at there in beginning of February. And I figured, well, Africa, seems like a pretty interesting opportunity. I wasn't sure if the infrastructure was going to be as reliable as it had been in the Balkans. I actually found on a practical level, it actually ended up in some ways much more reliable, but that's we'll be getting to that further on, I think. And unfortunately, then COVID came, and it did kind of get serious quite quickly. So I did end up heading back to the UK towards, on March 24th, apparently, right when everything was really shutting down. One of the last flights out, actually. But anyway, so but it's very doable, and that was a real big eye opener as well. And and after COVID, I hope to make it to the Ukraine. I've always wanted to do the Ukraine in depth, and probably a little more time in Moldova and head down back towards Romania that way. So let's hope that we can be doing that sometime soon. So now on to more just travel industry findings, general findings about some of the practicalities of all of this. So in the travel industry, which is one of my specialties anyway, and I've been attending quite a lot of online travel industry events since this has started, and had been going to a few industry events in person before. In the travel industry, there were certain trends that were already in place before COVID that were certainly things that have an impact on how we travel. So over tourism is definitely had been a massive one. I mean, you'd had places like Venice and Dubrovnik literally trying everything they could to limit the number of people that were going there. And then sustainability was also a massive issue for a lot of travelers, with the Greta Thunberg stuff, for example. People were really becoming a lot more conscious about their ecological footprint while flying, things like that. Those were certainly the prevailing trends before. And while they're still very, very important trends, I think, for example, we won't be seeing very much over tourism, hopefully returning quite to those levels, because simply for, nobody wants to get infected, and so nobody's really going to, I wouldn't be putting Dubrovnik high on my lists right now, for example, just for the fact, even when it's fairly empty, it's probably still pretty crowded, and that really increases the risk of transmission. So those two issues have basically sort of changed overnight. I mean, you're seeing so many single-use plastics and stuff like that coming back, which had been completely, avoided before. Now, the most pressing issues that we're facing now seem to be the expected trend is domestic travel returning first, which in a lot of ways will make traveling and working at the same time for people getting started doing it a lot easier, probably because you don't have the same practical considerations like what phones are you going to be able to have reliable phone service, because in your own country I would presume you probably already have reliable phone service. So that's an interesting trend and one that certainly is going to help. Let's see. And then we have, like I said, with the over-tourism, nobody wants to go to Dubrovnik right now for practical reasons. But people are really wanting to go off the beaten track, like up to mountains, someplace where like there's nobody around to, well, not nobody, but, fewer chances of infection, fewer vectors, that kind of thing. Then there's the trend towards fewer touch points. So I went out, for example, to lunch in Leeds yesterday. For the first time I'd eaten out since all this happened, and literally everything that you order on your phone, you pay on your phone, you basically do everything entirely, with your own stuff. You can basically get by without pretty much touching anything at all in the restaurant. And there are trends towards trying to make hotels like hotel room access on your phone, that kind of stuff. So we're going to be seeing that a lot more. That said, I actually found it interesting. I saw 3 people out yesterday working in a bar in Leeds on their laptops. So I guess mobile work is already starting to come back. Although I'm leaving the laptop at home for now personally, but anyway, and another thing that we're all looking for right now, I think, when we go places, we want to feel safe. So we want to, observe that there is visible cleaning going on, whereas before the actual industry trend was to avoid seeing that at all. So I think that's going to change. Those are all factors that are just going to change the kind of destinations we choose, which is going to be interesting. So on to just remote work in general. The traditional stigma against remote work is giving way to progress, which is good. I mean, it was already being viewed as a perk. A lot of companies in, like, say, Silicon Valley and stuff were going towards models where you had unlimited vacation time or could work from anywhere just as long as the work got done. And certainly, like, companies like my sister works for American Express, and I'm pretty sure they were allowed, like, X number of work from home days before every year or something like that. Well, now she's completely working from home until at least next year. So it's for practical considerations, it's gone overnight from just being a perk to sort of being expected. And this is a move towards giving the workers more freedom. People were already, pushing back towards just this idea that, the longer that you're, in the office, the more work you're getting done or stuff like that. And it's very, very clear that I think for us, especially as freelancers, we're well aware that that whole 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week thing doesn't necessarily actually equal the same kind of automatic productivity. But for particularly in, say, American culture, there was still just that expectation, and quite a lot of managers still probably have this in their head that if they can't physically see the employee, then no work's getting done. But at least, that, well, I mean, people are still working, so it's worked out well, in that respect. And I've even seen a few translation agencies starting advertising while looking for translators that, you can work from anywhere. And I don't think even a few years ago we were really seeing that being embraced as much. I feel like I used to have at least a few clients who were still a little bit, sketched. They sort of expect you to, have like an office in your house or something like that. Well, it's just interesting. But yes, necessity is the mother of invention, and the necessity of what's happened with COVID has absolutely, just gotten rid of or knocked down a lot of these arguments against remote work and made it considerably more socially, acceptable from a societal viewpoint. And like I keep saying, the work still gets done. So that's the most important thing, really. So, but before you hit the beach, we do have to talk about a few practical considerations. Like insurance. This is pretty key, actually, as I learned I think a lot of people did right when the pandemic hit. But so anyway, you need health insurance. So I'm maybe the only American out there saying that. No, just kidding. Yeah, I mean, you need health insurance because, a pandemic or something could hit. And I guess the big question there, I'd say, is do you buy your insurance from some domestic company or like Allianz or something like that? Will your health insurance from home actually cover you if you just pay a little bit extra for your destination, that sort of thing? Or there are also things like nomad insurance out there. And I've got a little bit of my policy over there on the side. That's basically one of the, that's not my policy, that's a warning that they sent out, actually. So I had joined Safety Wing actually only shortly before the pandemic, so I was actually quite surprised how good they were at keeping people up to date. But I mean, I didn't even know when I signed up, but apparently my insurance actually covered repatriation in case it was actually needed. And that did actually end up kicking in, I believe around March 9th or something. The dates were actually very, very important for how the policy was written. But basically what I'm saying, and I didn't end up having to take advantage of that anyway, and I wasn't going back to the US. So, but the point is, it's very, very important to read your policy very carefully because you might be surprised at what's actually covered and what isn't. A lot of them don't cover pandemics. A lot of them don't cover anything related to pandemics. So that's stuff to keep in mind. They may even have add-ons, like mine ended up offering an extra package that specifically covers COVID if you wanted it. And so that's, something to always weigh, everybody's decision, but certainly something to consider. And then the question of payment of how your insurance is paid for too may factor in. There's another competing insurance company. I'm trying to remember their name. They're quite famous. But what they want you to do always is pay completely upfront, which certainly makes sense for smaller trips, but it doesn't really make sense if you don't know how long your trip is or exactly where you're going or that sort of thing. So these are factors for you to decide individually, but they're absolutely important to be aware that they exist. And also some destinations may cost you extra on your policy. I find anytime I look at one that covers anything in the US, they're pretty much always an extra charge. So it's definitely, something to always keep in mind. So now your phone and internet service. For the mobile translator, this is probably the most important factor because this is your lifeline. And so there are certain considerations. Do you buy a local SIM card or can you bring yours from home? Now, a few years ago, using yours from home in any other country was pretty much out of the question. But with how the EU made it, I think that was a couple years ago, made it so that, all EU SIM cards should work in all the other EU countries. That's always an option if you're in an EU country. And you see neighboring countries. I'm not sure about the situation in Ukraine, but in the Balkans, for example, they were supposedly making a similar kind of pact with a lot of the former Yugoslav countries, the non-EU ones, claiming that their SIM cards are all supposed to work in the others. Now that law came in while I was in the Balkans, and as far as I could tell, it didn't actually get it. I mean, it is apparently on the books, but in practice, it isn't working that way. So in the Balkans, I've still found that I had to buy a new SIM card every time I changed countries, which can get quite annoying when it's like, Serbia to Montenegro. I mean, Montenegro is very, very small, and it's the same exact telephone company actually that I bought. It's just two separate countries. So it was a bit annoying, but those are, things to think about. Now, for your clients to be able to reach you, you might be wondering how to keep a static number. And in 2020, there are actually a lot of ways to do this. So we're actually, quite lucky compared to how things were a few years ago. So I'll just list a few options. I mean, there's Google Voice. There are similar services that I buy mine through. Can't remember, but anyway, I purchased mine through. I have a static UK number that I always have forward to my phone, and then there are other options, like if you happen to have a remote office service, they may offer local numbers as well. For my LLC that is registered in the US, I was offered that kind of service. I decided I didn't want it, but it was a pretty reasonable price. But yeah, there's just loads of options for getting a static number. And if you have any specific questions, you can direct them at me in the questions. But it's just basically not really a hurdle anymore. You may ask how much data you'll need. That is up to everybody. Basically, since it's so important, what I do is just buy the maximum amount of data that they'll give me when I change countries, typically, unless I'm only going to be there a very, very short period of time. And at least in Tanzania, that came in very, very handy. Emergency top-ups. There are actually a number of services online now. If you actually just Google emergency top-ups, they'll probably all pop up. And for just a small surcharge, usually you can literally top up your phone from anywhere, pretty much any time of day. And I've done this, probably at least 20 times now in different countries, and I've not yet come across any phone provider that it doesn't work with. I'm not saying that there aren't any, but yeah, in Tanzania, that was a huge vital thing to have and to know about, because the internet at most places, the internet was quite reliable, but every now and then I came across a place where it wasn't, and then having that maximum amount of data on your phone and being able to top it up when you need it immediately is really quite vital. And that leads right into be wary when it comes to relying on the accommodation having internet. Or even power for that matter. I've literally gone to a place in Sarajevo where this was through Airbnb actually, and when I arrived there, the woman started lighting candles in the apartment, and I was like, but that's unusual. And it turned out that her son had forgotten to pay the bill, so there was literally no electricity and no internet for a day or so, which is inconvenient if you have a deadline. I didn't, so that was lucky. I did end up going into town and doing some work the next day, but so just be wary and have your stuff charged up, and that's another good reason why having a ton of data on your phone is pretty vital. So, and then power, so more on power. With converters, be prepared. There's not much else to say other than that, I guess. But and unfortunately, with converters, you can never be too prepared either. I mean, you can still be caught unprepared because you never know if, for example, you're flying to the United States and giant blizzard comes and hits the British Isles, and you end up stuck in Dublin for a week. That actually happened to my fiance a couple of years ago. The thing was, because he was going to the U.S., he actually didn't have any of the any EU chargers with him at all. So that can be quite a hurdle. So having a universal charger is probably the best route to go for that on hand. And even then, there may be some like South Africa that it might not actually have that if it's a rare one, or like those northern Italian ones. I've never found any that are that seem to have that reliably on them. With cables, I guess just be cautious. Try not to get them too kinked up. And I actually bought a few in Tanzania. This was apparently quite a big problem. It had happened to a few other people too, where literally the cable itself that you buy, it looks fine, but it actually can only transmit a very, very tiny amount of power, like so little that my phone was charging like negative power. Like it said it was charging, but it was actually like losing battery as it was charging. I don't know how that happens, but I'm just saying, be cautious. If there's a new cable and something weird's going on, don't just automatically assume it's your phone. Train your eye to scope out power outlets when you're looking for a spot to work. It's becoming much easier because, everybody is working mobily. Certainly in Western Europe, you're not going to have very much trouble most places in big cities finding an outlet these days. But it can be a problem, and if you're sitting down to work, you want the outlet there. You don't want to be having to move around, and you don't want to be draining your battery just in case you need battery later. Unexpected power dips, they can and do happen. Dips. So that's another good reason to keep your stuff as charged as possible when you're on the road. And here's a pretty important one. Don't leave devices or literally anything else important on the floor. If you look over at the picture on the right, that is where I stayed at in Zanzibar. And it was on the first floor of a 3-story building. And it seemed, pretty watertight. Until I came back after a rainstorm and there was about a foot worth of water, not a foot, a few inches of water on the floor that stayed for about a week. And it was just quite lucky that, my laptop or anything else wasn't, on the floor, because it never would have occurred to me that could flood, but it did. So something to watch out for. Power banks, you want as big a power bank as you possibly can, and you want to pay attention to the voltage too. Some laptops, my Microsoft Surface, for example, in theory can be charged from power banks now, but they have to be a certain voltage. And it has to be through USB-C, I believe. So I haven't actually gotten this to work yet, but in theory it is possible, and I haven't gotten it to work because I basically don't have. Sorry about that. I don't know what that was. Sorry. Anyway, in theory, some computers can even be charged with phone power banks now, so it's something to keep in mind. And you could even go for a solar panel. That's very popular in Africa. But the problem with those is you can't actually take them on planes for the most part, is my understanding. So, but we'll probably be seeing more of that happening in the future. As for paperwork, that is a picture of the printer that I lugged around the Balkans. I do not recommend doing that. It's just very annoying, and you don't end up needing them nearly as much as you think you will, is what I found at least. You can usually ask your hotel, they'll usually print something for you. Depending on where you are, there may be print shops. In Africa, I could see that being a bigger problem. But for the most part, they do still exist. There are supposedly very, very compact printers that are coming out that can sort of, just scoot around like a little robot almost and print. So those are apparently out there, but I haven't seen any practical anyone using them practically yet. And then there's always, storage signatures, e-signatures, and touchscreens. Like I have a touchscreen on my Microsoft Surface, so presumably this just won't be a problem at all in the future because I can just sign it with my Surface Pen on the screen. And I think that is going to be something that we'll be seeing a lot more of too, with touchscreens becoming more and more out there. Let's see. And transport and events, I think we're just, especially with COVID, we're going to be seeing a lot of our tickets just on our phones from now on. I took 4 flights within Tanzania, and for all of them, I did not bring a printout of the ticket. I just had a copy of it on my phone, and that seemed perfectly acceptable to all of them. And I think that's just the reality of what is going to become reality in the future. For packing, developing a packing system, massive help. Packing cubes are your friend. You can see my very, very organized suitcase up there in the front. What is that? Left? Sorry. Yeah, so that is a very, very organized suitcase, but that only came about because in the Balkans, I had a very, very disorganized suitcase, and I learned my lesson. So, so definitely something to think about, having a packing system there. Wheels or no wheels, that's everybody's choice. I happen to prefer them, but most long-term travelers seem not to. But yeah, and one of the reasons I prefer them actually is weight, because I do tend to travel very, very heavy, basically at the limit of what I can check the bag at, which most people disagree with, but it's just my system. And then you're going to want sort of a mobile office, is what I call it. Just, a very dependable backpack, preferably with, anti-theft-ish kind of measures, stuff, something where they can't just, unzip it and grab your laptop or something, I mean, it seems like a practical thing, but it's just, it seems obvious, but it is a very, very vital part of the system. And then you're going to want just a bag in addition to your mobile office bag for stuff where you just need you need a backpack or something to tote around, groceries or whatever, and you just don't want to be moving your laptop and all of that stuff constantly out of the other bag. So yeah, I use this compact backpack right now, and before that I was using that orange and white bag in the Balkans. To lock up or not to lock up, basically your suitcases when you check them, that's philosophical, I guess. Some people say it draws more attention and makes it more likely that your stuff's going to get stolen. I personally don't bother locking them, especially because, I mean, at least if, for example, if I'm going to the US, TSA can unlock or will unlock them anyway. So it's just easier for me, I guess, not to even worry about it. And you're going to want a compact, lightweight machine, make frequent backups, sorry. You may want portable screens. A lot of people are traveling with these. They're basically just an extra screen that you can hook up to your machine. I don't know. I don't feel the need for that yet, and that's partially because I'm already pretty much maxing out the weight that I can deal with right now. But it's something to keep in mind. And I mentioned USB-C before. If you have a USB-C port, it's entirely possible that you may be able to actually, charge your phone, charge your computer off of it, depending on your model, and that'll probably be something that we'll be seeing more in the future. So definitely worth thinking about. When you're finding a place to work, if you're going to be somewhere for a while, I like to always establish sort of a relationship with that establishment, because sometimes, if you want to go for a swim, you can just ask them, if they'll watch your backpack, and a lot of times it'll work, sort of a trust kind of thing. And it's just, it's just a lot less hassle, like if you have a pre-existing relationship sort of with, the place that you've been working at. And then on top of that, I'd say live your brand. As you can see over there, I've got a Brickner Translations t-shirt. I get them pretty much every time I get more business cards, because it's just another extra $5 or something for the shirt. So I'm like, why not? And people do comment on it, when you're traveling, or if you've got a translator at work sticker on your machine. I don't yet, because I just got this neat skin with my business colors on it. But it's definitely a conversation starter, and you never know, it can definitely lead to work, or at least good conversation, and it gets your brand image out there. We're sort of running out of time, so I'm afraid I'm gonna have to just rush through these a little bit. So for travel days, the days that you are going to be really moving, do not count on being able to work on public transportation. You may get lucky and you may be able to, or as in this picture to the right, you may be squeezed up against a door until Manchester for some reason. So you just never know, and you can't count on it. So get your work done before moving, if at all possible. Let's see, or plan in time to do it after you get to your destination, which is probably better, because then you can take advantage of, if you do get lucky enough to be able to work on it on the transportation. I always try to keep longer travel days to weekends if possible, especially if you're changing countries, because you're going to need to get a new SIM card in a lot of cases in the next country. So that's something to always keep in mind. Internet on the plane, is it worth it? That's cost-benefit analysis, I guess. I have yet to find one where paying for it is actually worth it to me. And I think that's what a lot of people are also saying. But if, for some reason, circumstances make it that way, then, maybe it's worth the upgrade. Things to think about when changing countries, mainly just the SIM card thing. Like, if you're going to be needing a new SIM card right away when you get there, then you're going to need to do that. And it can be a hassle when you realize once you've arrived, you don't have internet to even figure out how to find a SIM card. So always something to think about. When to book accommodation, that's a personal decision. I personally generally like to try and do it as last minute as possible, actually. But a lot of people, that's a bit probably not their style. Accommodation red flags. Not every place that's marked as workspace friendly actually is. We had one place in Sarajevo, the same one with the power outage, that said they were workspace friendly, and it was actually like a dresser or something. I don't know. For me, it's less of a problem. I don't mind, working on my lap or whatever. But for some people, it's a pretty annoying thing to deal with. And not every place that advertises a backup generator actually has it working. I think a few colleagues in Tanzania mentioned this, and it was a real hassle at their place when the power went out. Cultural confusion. Oh, the hot tub paradox. For some reason in the Balkans, all these places on Airbnb were advertising they had a hot tub. Well, it turned out they actually meant a hot water heater, not like a hot tub you swim in. So that led to a lot of my disappointment till I figured that out. But anyway, the point is that you have to be able to roll with, these unexpected things when there's, stuff you weren't quite expecting. And also, just pro tip, most or all flat screen TVs can easily just be used as a second screen if you need one. Just plug in an HDMI cable and it works. So it's always good to have an HDMI cable with you too. I don't carry too many random cables that don't serve a purpose or an immediate purpose, but HDMI cable, I always make sure I have one of those with. And be aware that some places literally don't have addresses or passable roads. That the picture down there is in Dar es Salaam, and I went out for dinner in the middle of a rainstorm and almost didn't come back. I guess no. But there were literal holes in the road, like car-sized holes, and it was quite terrifying. And I had a deadline, so that did not lead to a very happy dinner, not being sure if I was going to, be able to actually get back to do the work I had to do. Luckily, it worked out. But just be aware of that. Maybe it was a very small order. It was like something where if I'd have just gotten it out of the way before going, then it wouldn't have, been on my mind all night. But, lesson learned there. And save yourself unnecessary stress. Download your projects locally as soon as you possibly can. If you absolutely need Wi-Fi when you're going to a restaurant or something, ask them before you order, for sure. It does still happen occasionally that places don't have Wi-Fi. It still happens. Always be prepared for your uploads to take a lot longer than expected if you're on an unfamiliar internet connection. So always leave a nice time cushion there. And try to keep your devices as fully charged as possible. There's the taxi hotel trick. This one's just handy. Like if you really need a taxi, but you don't trust walking up to one on the street, if there's a nice looking hotel, if you go in and pretend to be a guest or just ask nicely, a lot of times they'll just help you out because it's good, it helps their image. And recognize when you just can't work. And recognize when you need to shell out to get yourself out of a situation, like if you're in Africa and there's a pandemic. I'm going to have to really skip over this. But how to approach it with your customers? Some won't care, and some still might not like it. But yeah, I think that's just an individual thing. Occasionally time zones will work in your favor. Sometimes they don't, and that's just something you kind of have to accept and be able to live with. The philosophical question, what does out of office actually mean if there isn't an actual physical office? That's more philosophical than anything else, but I think as a society in general, we're going to be struggling with that one, actually. It'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. And that you just always have to keep in mind some parts of the world are going to be more dangerous, remote, or random to work from. And that's just something that you have to kind of acknowledge and weigh. As a freelancer, how much you want to tell your clients about if you're traveling, what you're doing, that sort of thing. As always, it's really your call. But you still need to be open about key and important details, like if you really, really can't do something. Like when I was basically worried I wasn't going to get out of Africa, I had about 4 days between the flight where I was just sitting in Dar es Salaam, and my clients kept asking me to work, and I was like, I just had to be honest and tell them, I'm sorry, I'm stuck in Africa and I'm way too stressed. I would love to do this job because it would give me something to do, but the amount of stress that I'm under, I can't guarantee quality work. And that, certainly with it being COVID, it's already unusual, a situation where it's understandable. But it's still important to let them know. And maintaining boundaries. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Someone asked on a group while I was in Tanzania if it's possible to work while climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. Now the answer to that is technically yes. all of the base camps, all of the camps on the climb apparently do have internet connection now, hotspots or whatever. But the question is, why would you want to? Like, that's the best out of office excuse ever. Like, I'm climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, you know? And I found out recently too, apparently there's 5G on Mount Everest. But again, why would you want to be working while you're climbing Mount Everest? So don't be afraid to take a day off. 24/7 availability is a very slippery slope. So, sorry, thank you all. Hope I didn't go too much over time or keep you guys from dinner. And I'm happy to answer any questions or comments. That's my email down there.
Thank
And
you.
I,
Thank you, Jeanette,
yeah,
for all
that's it.
those valuable tips and precautions. I see that most of them were gained through unpleasant and sometimes very tough situations. So it's really priceless. Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Hi, thank you very much for that informative presentation. It was something like translators oriented travel show. Thank you very much. So my question is, how do you cope with the time difference? Because you travel so much to different parts of the world, and well, it's quite okay when you are traveling just for tourism or for leisure, for pleasure and so on. But if it is about deadline and if you need to meet that deadline, do your customers understand that? Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, my main problem with this has generally only been in the United States, I would say, actually. It's just when I go to visit my parents, it's literally just the opposite of German time, basically, 7 hours difference. And I don't have any good ways to cope with that other than sort of avoiding going there whenever possible. You but if you go the other direction, I've always found it's always better to be, for me at least, to be a few hours ahead of Germany. So like I said, it's a give or a take on that. But it's yeah. So it's something everybody has to sort of cope with that individually. So.
Questions more?
Yeah. I have a mic. I will have one question from online audience. It's a question from Sofia Gutkin. She was our speaker today, earlier. Jeanette, I have so many questions because I'm in a very similar situation, living out of suitcase at the moment. Do you miss being able to work in cafes at the moment because of COVID-19? Yes, okay.
Definitely.
How are you able to stay in Europe for so long despite having US passport?
Well, it's part of the reason why I travel, I guess, at the moment. I've in the past usually had Romanian or Czech residency for years at a time. But for the last couple of years, I've been having a few more hiccups um, trying to get residency. So it's complicated. I'm in the UK because my fiance is British. She's actually speaking on Friday, I think, Nigel Wheatley. Um, so we do sort of have this as a base, but it's complicated trying to get UK residency as well. So it's part of the reason why I bounce around so much, actually.
Thank you. And another question from Sophia is, how does this continuous travel affect your relationships with friends, family, and so on?
For most of them, I mean, I wouldn't say it's too rough on friendships. I already live separately from most of my friends anyway. And I guess how it affects my personal relationship, I actually think Nigel and I roll with it pretty well, weirdly. I don't know.
Okay,
We probably
thank
talk
you.
more every day than we do when I'm here.
Okay, thank you. So it was our last question for today, and it was our last speech for today. And Jeanette, thank you very much, and we really, really hope that your travel list will continue in 2021, and you will visit this UTICamp 2021 conference. So
hopefully.
yes, hopefully see you next year. Bye bye for now.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Раз. Друзья, сейчас мы все идем на ужин.